participated with quite active chat boards and question answer sessions. The recording of these conversations are available on TRIF's YouTube channel. We plan to come up with a compendium of key insights and recommendations emerging from these conversations. Today, in the concluding conversation of this series, we focus on how the new emerging Ruralscape can become a catalyst for growth and equity in India, especially for the marginalized and the vulnerable. The multidimensional impact of the pandemic has brought into focus the need for better understanding of the future of rural and the role of the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar in creating opportunities and mitigating vulnerabilities in the short and the long term. We could not have a better panel today to discuss these complex issues. We have Hari Menon, who leads the India office of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he also oversees the foundation's work in South and Southeast Asia. He has been with the foundation for over 15 years and worked on diverse issues, starting with the foundation's work around HIV/AIDS and then on to issues of public health care focused on maternal and child care. I have known Hari for over a decade and can say for sure that impacting lives of poor as is the key motivator for him. Then we have Anurag Beher, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Wipro Limited, CEO of the Azim Premji Foundation and Vice Chancellor of Azim Premji University. Anurag has been closely involved with efforts to improve education in India over a decade. He has been an advocate for criticality of public systems, particularly in relation to education in India. Anurag has earlier played leadership roles in business. He was the CEO of Wipro Infrastructure Engineering and served on the board of Wipro Healthcare. He also serves on various government and industry councils, such as the National Mission for Teacher and Teacher Education, the Government of India Implementation Committee for Justice Verma Commission, and with the CII's National Climate Change Council. He has been honored by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. I personally enjoy his column on Mint, which talks on issues of education and ecology. Interestingly, both Hari and Anurag are XLRI alum, and both of them have engineering degrees prior to XLRI MBA. We have Mr. N.N. Sinha, who is the Secretary for Rural Development in Government of India. Mr. Sinha has been part of the Indian Administrative Services for over 3 decades now. He has held diverse leadership roles at state and central level during this period. Prior to his current role, he has been the chairperson of National Highways Authority, Secretary, Border Management. I personally have known Sinha sir for over 25 years, and I can see that issues of rural, the livelihoods of poor, and transforming rural has been areas of passion for sir. As additional Chief Secretary, Rural Development in Jharkhand, he brought in several innovative programs, accelerating implementation of flagship RD programs in the state. India could not have a better person leading the rural development in these uncertain times. Welcome, sir. And lastly, we have Isabel, who is the host for today's discussion. She is the co-founder of Imago Global Grassroots, a not-for-profit that works with grassroots and social entrepreneurs and governments across the world to scale up innovations from the base of the pyramid. Isabel is an economist and has worked at the World Bank for most of her professional career, including as a vice president of South Asia. She has a deep understanding of developmental challenges in India. Isabel also teaches scaling up of developmental impact at Harvard Kennedy School. She has been a mentor to us, and she has been guiding us in this journey even before TRI was a formal entity. With a lot of anticipation, I hand over the session to Isabel.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. This is, first of all, an amazing panel. Second, this is TRI is a journey, as Anirban was saying, that we've been following with a lot of enthusiasm, and now we can see how rich it has evolved. And the topic, of course, it's an amazing topic. So we are going to talk today about the emerging ruralscape and its potential to be a productive habitat both for human development, social and economic activity. We want to reflect today with the panelists who have deep experience in different, very complementary spaces related to the ruralscape, to think about what is the shift that we need to do in the intent, in the role, in the way that we see this potential ruralscape unique to India. So why is this so important? As you all know, 2/3 of the people in India are employed in the rural areas, both farm and off-farm, and the rural population is changing very quickly. Very young population, which is much more connected than the previous generation, knows about technological platforms, is connected to the service industry, to all the other off-farm, but also we heard in a previous panel how this rural-urban distinction is really not that helpful anymore because of the way that the population has changed in the rural areas. Other countries have tried to transform the ruralscape. My country, Chile, did it by removing all the protection, excessive protection that industry had, and really developing agribusiness and transform the ruralscape. China did it by investing in secondary towns, in village towns, and saw a huge growth based on actually entrepreneurship, small business, that fueled a lot of the initial growth in China. And of course, India is unique. India will not do it like Chile did it. India will not do it like China did it. And we would love to have a conversation where we understand this uniqueness through the deep experience of each panelist in order to start weaving a conversation where we will then invite participants with questions and answers. So the structure of the session will be 5 minutes, each panelist will present, and then we will be receiving your questions through the chat and weaving it so that we have a conversation. We have quite ample time, so we are really expecting this to be exciting and to really hear from you. So let me start with Mr. Sinha, who is going to talk about the government's role for transforming this landscape. As Anirban said, this is one of the most important role in order to make this happen. And we are very lucky to have you with your deep expertise. And so with no more ado, over to you, Mr. Sinha. Thank you so much. I think you are in mute.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you, TRIF and the organizers of today's panel. It's a very important theme that we are discussing today, and let's reflect for a moment why is this very important. First of all, we need to realize that the about 70% of the workforce is there in the rural areas, whereas if you see in the terms of economic output, it's about 47%, as was worked out for 2011 by Dr. Ramesh Chand, who is now a member of the Indian Niti Aayog. If you see the productivity of the worker in off-farm and the rural and the urban, you'll see that there is a factor of about 2.8. So basically, the farm workers are 1/3 less productive of the off-farm workers, and that is why you see the lure of people willing to migrate to the urban areas to seek employment. The other factor, which is also very important, and we need to factor into our discussions, is the fact that the structure of and the asset holding in the rural areas is also quite uneven. So it does not leave with many people, particularly small and marginal farmers and the landless laborers, with much of an option to stay in the rural areas. That is why you see a large volume of migration taking place from rural areas to the urban areas. Now, issue that was kind of a poison kind of a thing, but as soon as the COVID related lockdowns came into place, there was a large number of migrants going back to the rural areas. So, in addition to what the privations were faced by the people in course of their journey back to the rural areas, the issue remains as to what are those factors which are motivating a very large number of people to the urban areas, and can we do something to kind of facilitate their holding back in their own habitats. And this fact requires additional urgency because of the several studies which were carried out last year, and which mentioned that while about 50 odd percent people will go back to their earlier employments, there were about 1/4 of the migrants who went back to their own cities, their own villages. They wouldn't come back. They would seek employment in the rural areas itself. So the necessity of looking at activities which generate employment, which generate income, and provide a sustainable way of living, which is equitous and which is provides them good amenities. Now, let's see what seems to be happening in the rural areas. While there are programs, for example, you have Saubhagya program and other rural electrification program, which kind of have brought saturation to the rural electrification. You have programs relating to the rural roads, which have brought roads to almost 95% of the total population. If you see the structure, you can see for yourself that with the current structure of population and the norms of the rural road construction, about 95% of the habitats have been. Similarly, if you see the programs like drinking water now, Har Ghar Nal scheme, or that scheme, about 4 crores or 40 million households have been provided with drinking water facility, and the way program seems to be moving, in about 3 years' time, we should be having a very large number of households connected with tap water supply, and I think that's going to be certainly a kind of revolution in the way life takes place in the rural areas. So, in terms of amenities, things seem to be improving. But is similar improvements taking place in the area of incomes and employment? Let me try to provide some picture of it. There are agricultural programs with which many of the panelists and many of the people in the today's colloquies are aware of. So let me concentrate on some of the activities which have been taken by our ministry in terms of developing and adding on to them. So one of the most important things which this ministry has done is to develop a program for the rural women, and rural women are the entry point, but the end beneficiaries are the households. So in about 10 years of its journey, starting from 2011, and I'm saying so because 2011 NRLM was announced. So you have about 70 lakh SHGs, a group of 15 women banding together. Then organization at village level called village organization, 400,000 in number. Then you have a cluster level federation which aggregate about 25 to 30 village organizations. They have more than 30,000 in number. So this is on the front of organizing these women. Then if you see in terms of livelihood, so more than 100,000 user groups, more than 200, I should now say 300 farmer producer organizations, and a large number of producer enterprises. So this is what has been done in terms of organizing people for livelihoods. The Mahatma Gandhi Narega program is a program which large number of panelists and audience are aware of. And in last few years, the emphasis on linking the program to individual benefits, and particularly for generating more livelihoods, has been one area of emphasis. So, trying to link the SHG for livelihood through assets being provided by Mahatma Gandhi Narega and other such programs is another development which has. The third development of note is the effort which has been made by government recently in terms of farmer producer organization, but also it has been an ongoing quest for the government. In terms of cooperatives, and well to recall that cooperatives were the agency through which the dairy revolution in this country, or the white revolution in this country, was brought in. To take another variant of it are the farmer producer organization, and about 10,000 farmer producer organizations are supposed to be brought in, and our farmer producer organizations, we got about 200 to form these groups, and we have done about 80 odd in number, and we are all well on the way of creating another 100. Then you have the scheme of the one district, one product, so kind of producing specialization so that the ecosystem gets generated. Then you have infrastructure fund which has been created by the government for both agriculture, dairy, and to some extent in the area of fisheries and marine products as well by Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. So a lot of work on the value chain development. The other aspect which is important is the diversification of production in the rural areas. So we are quite conscious of the fact that the cereal production is not growing in terms of value. So agriculture income cannot grow by focusing on the production of cereals. So focus on the livestock, focus on the fruits and vegetables, and such other high value products that can be produced on farm related to processing. So that's another area which is being grown. Now, linked with it is the issue of value chain, and which I talked in terms of organization, but the quest for the rural development ministry, and I guess all the ministries, is to make sure that the largest portion of the value that can be captured should be captured. And the collectives of women, the farmer producer organization, and now indeed the cooperatives being made a separate ministry of the Indian government. I guess there would be a lot of activity in the on the front of cooperatives as well. So all these groups aggregating through this power of aggregation, doing some amount of primary processing, and then having a better bargaining power vis-a-vis the market, their ability to band together vis-a-vis the agri-tech players, aggregators, all of that which lead to market. So a lot of work and potential exist in terms of diversification of production and creation of value chains. Then I think one area which seems to be important and which we need to look at, and I guess it has been one of the important factors for rapid economic development in many countries, is the value of decentralized manufacturing in rural areas. So you see the issue of ledger copper. So there are a large number of people involved in the production, but the production has been standardized in a manner in which the ultimate producer, the ultimate consumer gets good quality, but it's not machine-led manufacturing. Similarly, I see a large number of our SHG women taking up LED bulb and LED-related products manufacturing. So the importance of these labor-intensive manufacturing is there, but we have got a lot of work to do in this area. And the fifth area which I would like to kind of mention is the importance of doing a lot of work on the area of the pre-consumer kind of activities, so packaging, labeling, branding, marketing, all of that, so that the products of the rural producers get visibility. So let me stop at this, and then I will come in after some time when I would like to discuss the issues that we need to face. Well, a lot of work has been done, but there are gaps and which we need to face. So thank
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. NN Sinha. I'm so happy to hear this because, as you mentioned, NRLM started in 2011. I was working in the World Bank and we were supporting with the first loans for that. And the resistance inside the bank from the economists for this livelihood mission was huge because there was no evidence. We didn't know if it really would impact poverty. And now to see 10 years later, this amazing program, it's really moving. I'm very happy. And it actually is unique to India. We were talking before, what's the unique way in which India will reinvent its Ruralscape? And the fact that it's based on collectives, on self-help groups, it's unique. And I think the rest of the world is looking at this experience to see whether we can find the evidence to actually take it to other places. So thank you so much. This is wonderful. Very good. So Anurag, welcome. And I would love to hear from you. What are the vulnerabilities that you see? What is the basic actions that need to be there for a true transformation? With your deep experience in communities, in community-led, could you talk about that? And I also know, Anurag, that you have been working on COVID-related experiences, what has happened. So if it's in any way relevant, if you could also include that. Over to you.
Thank you, Isabel. And good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Let me start with a confession, Isabel. I'm a bit of a bear, as in versus a bull and a bear on the stock markets, you know. And I think it's a pretty effective strategy in life to look at how empty the glass is rather than how full the glass is. And particularly in roles like mine. So with that confession, let me make 3 points. The first is about what COVID has shown us. Not that we needed COVID to show it to us. Second is, therefore, what COVID has shown, and which, as I said, we didn't need COVID for us to see it, what I think we need to focus on, what are the priorities, and third, a bit of perhaps how it can be or should be done. So We did not need COVID to tell us how iniquitous we are structurally. We didn't need that, but it's shown us starkly, absolutely starkly. The stark images of people walking back home from the city that I am in, Bangalore, in May. There's a highway nearby. I used to run there in the morning. I'll stop people and I'll ask them, where are you going? This is Bangalore. And they'll say, we're going to Jharkhand or to Orissa, right? So the stark inequities that are structurally embedded, are structured in our country, our society. We didn't need COVID, but COVID has shown that to us, right? COVID has also shown, and again, we didn't need it, how inadequate, and inadequate in itself is an inadequate word to talk about our health system. So I cannot grab an appropriate word for what we have seen with COVID on the health side, right? Education, which is my field of work, right? It's just incredible, the inequity in education. And in the inequities, strangely, both sides, which means, we know we have 240 million students. We know that 210 or 220 million of those students have no possibility at all of doing online education. And we still believe that we're doing something by doing online education. On the other hand, the inequities of another kind, which is actually rural schools could have been started much earlier across the country. Right? There is sound evidence, sound operational experience that rural schools could have been started. And it's not just rural schools, but schools that serve small communities could have been started. But we've not done that. So let's pause. Let all of us be real. We are all real. We see all this, but let's recognize ourselves to be the country that we have made for ourselves. We've done wonderful things over the past 70 years, or over the past few thousand years, but let's recognize where we stand. What it has told us, if I again may repeat the same phrase, we didn't need COVID, but what it has told us, that there's something fundamental about us which we need to focus on, some fundamentals. We cannot keep tinkering. We can't keep cutting at the edges or shortcuts and think that we'll somehow compensate for fundamental issues or deficiencies. So my second point is, what are those fundamental issues or deficiencies? There are many of them. I won't talk about all of them. I'll just talk about three. The first one is education. And education in this country, and that is not to do with COVID, it's for us to see, education is very far away from where it should be. Now, as I mentioned, it's not as though we've not made progress. We made remarkable progress in education in getting our kids into school. Our gross enrollment rates have risen. They're near 100% at the primary and upper primary level, right? Gender equity on primary schools, an absolutely remarkable progress. But that doesn't mean that we should take our eyes away and look at some victory that we've actually got. We've not. Across the country, whether we are talking about primary, secondary, or our higher education, the quality of education that we have is just very poor. There's no other word for it. And the fact is that the National Education Policy 2020, which was approved by the Union Cabinet last year in July, in my view, is a transformative roadmap, absolutely transformative roadmap for Indian education. But education is a fundamental unless we, let me use the word fix that, and fix, I'm using not a mechanical sense, I'm thinking of a 20-year roadmap. Unless we do that, not far are we going to go. Second, health systems. And what does one say about health, right? I mean, do we need to tell ourselves here to anybody where we stand on health? And unless we fix the fundamentals of health, the public health system, right? We are not going to have a country which has any degree of basic well-being, right? We're not going to move forward. The statistics on how many millions of people are pushed into poverty because of health issues, all of you are familiar with. But to my mind, the numbers of such kind really hide the human misery, which we have faced recently in April and May, right? And that April and May was a stark reminder of what the situation is. So unless we sort out the fundamentals of education and health, right? And these are deficits of decades. They're not going to get solved in 5 years. The third fundamental I'm even more worried about. Education, as I said, I think the country has a terrific roadmap in the national education policy, and we need to implement it. On the health side, I don't think we have a roadmap. We don't have a roadmap, the same kind that we have on education. But there are ideas, they're contested ideas, but there are ideas. And therefore, I think there's a direction on health, which if converted into a roadmap, people go behind it, and then implementation happens, we can still get there. The third one I'm particularly worried. And the third one is, what about livelihoods? Right? Mr. Sinha was talking about it. And this is, as I said, this is not for want of the glass not being partially full. The glass is partially full. But I think let's recognize that for a country of 1.4 billion people, we do not understand what is the underlying economic model which can take millions, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, right? The export-led model which took the Southeast Asian countries and China out of where they stood, that is not available to us, right? You have dramatic forces of automation that are happening. So manufacturing, to the extent that is there, is getting significantly more capital intensive, right? And so what are we going to do? I don't think, and to my mind, that's why I said, let's recognize where the glass is empty. I don't think that we have really comprehensive ideas about what we're going to do about livelihoods in the same manner that we have comprehensive ideas about education. In the case of education, a roadmap. In the case of health, comprehensive ideas. But in the case of livelihoods, we don't have that. And I'm not talking about specific programs. The NRLM is a wonderful thing. I completely endorse that. But if you look at the country, where we stand, and I think one of the speakers when I was watching the video mentioned it, that the divide between rural and urban doesn't stand anymore. We've seen that again, right? So in this vast country of ours, what is this livelihood? What is the economic model? We are still struggling to even articulate a comprehensive scheme, right? Just one point on that, and then I'll move on to my third basic point, and which is this, that while we are constructing or imagining or experimenting with this, what I'm calling the comprehensive economic model for our country, social security is something that we need to have, basic social security, right? And I think we have a fabulous mechanism on basic social security, which is we have the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, and I think that's a fabulous social security mechanism. I think we need to fund it more, fund it better, run it better, create more productive assets, and we need to have something similar for the urban areas. Right? So the fundamentals, education, we have a roadmap, we got to implement. Health, we don't have a roadmap, but we have, I think, comprehensive set of ideas, needs to get converted into roadmap and implementation. Livelihoods, we don't know comprehensively economically for this country.
Yeah.
Third, last, therefore what ahead? What should we do? First,
one minute.
Yes,
Sorry.
3A.
Yeah.
3A. We have to have public investment. There's no substitute, right? This thing is about the market, right? There is no substitute to public investment. We have to have public investment. Without public investment, education will not improve and health will not improve. There is no running away from that. Second is we have to invest in the front line, right? The front line is our education will be as good as the quality of our teachers and the motivation of our teachers. Everything is secondary. Our public health system is going to be as good as levels and the capacities of our frontline healthcare workers. We've seen that, right? So invest in the front line. The third, and that's because of where we stand here today in this group, civil society. What can civil society do? And the question that civil society needs to ask of itself is, what can it do to complement public investment? And I think what civil society can do, and I'll be very specific. Of course, civil society can do hundreds of things, right? But I'll be very specific. Civil society has the possibility of getting really good people who are like the vanguard, right? From wherever they come. They might come from a village in Jharkhand or from Manipur, but civil society has the possibility of creating the vanguard, which creates changes in these places, in the front line, right? So civil society has to invest in the front line, and that's the unique capacity and possibility they have. So Isabel, thank you.
Thank you, Anurag. Actually, it's a wonderful segue to Harry. I think the issue of livelihoods and how to scale it. And I would love if Harry could address the issue of scale, but also the issue how different actors come together. So just I wanted to mention something in the chat to Anurag's presentation. Anurag, we always need bears. We need bears and bulls. We need the yin and the yang. And I think Anish was saying, it helps us to aspire, and it drives us to action, to see the glass half full as well. And that's why we're all in development. Otherwise, we wouldn't be. So I thank you for your intervention. So Harry, over to you. Since the other two speakers have done 10 minutes instead of 5, I think you should go ahead and do 10 minutes. This topic is much richer than 5 minutes. So over to you, and looking forward to hearing your comments.
No, thank you so much, Isabel, and thanks to the TRIF team for convening this wonderful week of conversations. And it's a privilege to be on a panel with Mr. Sinha and Anurag, both of whom I look up to, and I think constantly learn from every time I hear them and interact with them. And I think Mr. Sinha laid out the macro conditions that frame today's conversation. I think Anurag very articulately laid out the challenges and the where to from here. I recognize and fully accept all of Anurag's points, but I feel we need to look for the opportunities, and I think that is the indomitability of the human will, that there are always ways to move forward. And in a country like India, I think the space for experimentation is always there. And to me, that is both the opportunity as well as the pathway for scale. And in that context, I think the NRLM has actually shown us how scale could happen in a country like India. One can look in general for what has happened in other countries, and Isabel, you made the point, there are global lessons, but I think they are of limited use when you consider a country like India. For one, the size, scale, heterogeneity, diversity of India, makes us very unique. Second, any such learning has to be rooted to context. And I think we have to look at the current context of India and how we would look at change and transformation, and how do we enable it. To me, the lesson of NRLM, and it's only a 10-year program, but it kind of feels like it's been around for longer, because when you head out into the states where at least we work, you can see in the last 5-7 years the transformation that has taken place in the women that you interact with. I again get a lot of the challenges that we see and that we must address as a country, coming together to fix a lot of the fundamental social layers, social services that we must kind of make a right or a guarantee to all of our citizens if we are to fully realize the potential of what we think is our demographic dividend. And what to me the NRLM shows is that an approach that looks at important technical elements, the so-called hard stuff, but then creates an appropriate layer of software around it to enable scale. The model of having these community resource persons from different parts of the country. I mean, Anurag's last point on what civil society needs to do. I think what has enabled the states that have done relatively better on scaling up NRLM has really been that opening yourself up to people, to women from other states who don't speak the language, but who by coming and being embedded in the local context were able to position themselves as the role models and change makers who can create a vision for transformation that is much more believable and real in what would seem like fairly different contexts. And to me, this is the essence of how change needs to happen in India, where we look at the front line, the grassroots. I totally agree with Anurag that is where change is going to happen. And to me, that is where MORD has been focusing, is to move away from the top down TA and the top down the parachuting in of expertise, to start to create that more and more at the local level. Now, the reality of India is that for all the very impressive statistics that Mr. Sinha shared, we probably need like 10 or 20 or 100x of some of that to happen. But I think we are on the pathway there. And to me, therefore, the opportunities are two or threefold. One is, I think we need to continue the process of getting local government, community groups, and particularly women's groups more involved in articulating the vision for change, even for livelihoods, than is currently the practice. I think there is still a tendency to think of templates that need to be emulated, whether it is for sectors that can create opportunities, or for value chains that need to be developed. I think we need to decentralize much more actively than is already happening. The approach of defining competitive advantage, relating that more to the context that exists at the grassroots, and then enabling the visioning, the planning, the resource allocations at that level. I think the government of India's mechanisms enable that. I think MORD in particular has been an exemplar for enabling some of that grassroots-led planning, but I think a lot more needs to be done, and that's where we need to invest in building those capabilities and capacity at the front lines. Think of planning more at the district, at the block, and the village/town construct. And I think we'll probably get more contextual solutions. The second element I want to call out is, I think, a role for philanthropy as distinct from the private sector. Philanthropy can actually play the role of pure risk capital. Frankly, none of us expect any financial returns. We expect social returns on the funds that we can deploy and on the expertise that we can bring to bear. I think it's very important that we partner with the government and with communities to identify those opportunities for risk taking, to make sure that those are aligned with the contextual priorities identified by community and local government. In the absence of that, I think we'll still be left with these nice frameworks that you can put a lipstick on a pig and claim that things are moving, but it doesn't really drive change in any sustainable way. And I think there is still that tendency for us to think of scalable models. I think we forget that we don't want models to scale. We want impact and transformation to scale. And for that, taking risks to enable community-led plans and visions to be articulated is the opportunity for philanthropy. The third, I would say, is the role of the private sector. Now, the private sector is a very big actor in India's growth and development. I think there is to reference the to reference Indian mythology, there is a Trishanku-like position that the private sector operates. It's a bit of a twilight zone, right? On the one hand, they play a dominant role in the delivery of many services, already in healthcare, increasingly so in education, but often do that in the absence of one very clear regulatory framework, and in the absence of clear accountabilities. The private sector are driven by a set of incentives which are largely efficient capital allocation and profit maximization, not necessarily serving the needs or interests of the poorest and most marginalized. I think we need the government to lead, to create the framework, both regulatory and accountability, for the private sector to play a constructive role in areas like livelihoods, as opposed to thinking of the private sector as an agent for outsourced responsibility. I think the private sector can be productive, but with a lot of caveats, because profit maximization is going to be a primary driver. With the excess of global capital that's sloshing around, that search for extra returns can take people into riskier markets. But what we cannot allow as a country is for that risk to be borne by our poorest. So to me, that enabling role the government has to play. The final point I'll make is I think we must privilege and prioritize the role of women in livelihoods. I think there is no way India is going to achieve equitable development or even basic development if women continue to drop out of the labor force, and if women-led enterprises continue to face differential barriers as they currently do. I think we need to design for the needs of women, and this cannot be an afterthought. It has to be a primary lens for how we support the articulation of a roadmap. I think this roadmap is really going to have to mean 100,000 or maybe 1 million roadmaps, because I don't think it's possible for us to come up as a country with one national roadmap. I think we can articulate principles at the national level, but those then need to translate down. But one national principle has to be to keep women at the forefront of whatever livelihoods, opportunities and channels we develop. I think we are at an important inflection point where business as usual is not going to be an option. The fractures that COVID has exposed, the economic setbacks that the globe and India have faced, and I think the increasing pressures that climate change is going to put on the current economic model is going to force us to think differently. And I don't think this is now going to be an option that we'll have. I think a lot of this change is going to be on us in the next decade, not even the next 3 decades. And fundamental questions that we currently take for granted, like food security, like a basic element of social peace and order, are potentially up for question unless we come up with this model. So I think there is going to be a need for us to push. I think the only way is through constructive partnerships where the government plays the role of the enabler, the stage setter, where communities and local government are in the driver's seat for visioning and are supported to be able to do that role, and where philanthropy can play the role of risk taker, and the private sector can come in a graduated and calibrated way. I think we have all of the right elements in India for this to happen. So I therefore believe change is possible. And I think actors like MORD, TRIF, APF, I think are really well positioned to lead on this. As a foreign foundation, but one that has roots in India, we stand ready to play a collaborative role, to contribute as best as we can. We already have a productive partnership with the MORD and with several state governments, and we look forward to continuing in that role. So with that, I'll stop here. I think I took my 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Isabel.
Fantastic, Harry. I mean, we have 3 amazing panelists. And I just wanted to, 2 things of what you said, Harry, that I really want to here capture and sort of focus on. The first one is the invest in building capacities at the front line. So as development and life has become more complex, we are using more and more this idea of design thinking, which is actually to put the user, the ultimate user, whether in the private sector, in the public sector, the ultimate user, which in this case would be the self-help groups or the community resources, at the center of the design. Why? Because we know that top-down design doesn't have the same traction that design that is done by the people who understand very much their environment and what needs to change. So I think it's really a very, very important point, this about putting more resources at the sort of user level, at the front line, in order to really have transformation. The second thing that I want to take in my course, I'm going to quote you, Harry, that we don't want models to scale. We want transformation to scale. Scaling up is a transformation. It requires so many changes, organizational changes. It requires business model changes. It requires your theory of change to change over time as you see whether you get the impact or you don't. So scaling up, which is what Anurag was talking about, how do we scale up livelihoods? It's a very complex undertaking, but it's absolutely, absolutely crucial. So we have many questions. I'm going to start with the first question, and it's going to go to Mr. Sinha because he has to leave in a little bit, which is, but I will ask all of you to think about this same question. What can be the pathways to promote the local leadership for this rural transformation? So first, to you, Mr. Sinha.
So this issue of promoting local leadership for local rural transformation is an important one, and I think one will need to realize that the NRLM program itself is a way of developing that capacity. But I think we need to also focus on the Panchayati Raj institutions and local government institutions. And until unless we do similar capacity, because those are the government at the local level, I guess the kind of transformations that we want to happen will not come. So I think one of the models which has been focused for 3 to 4 years is what we call Gram Panchayat Development Planning. And there the local governments do plan for all the 29 subjects which have been transferred to them. So this is a journey which is has been initiated. The current focus is on a few subjects because the state departments do not feel very much comfortable in terms of transferring their responsibilities and enabling the local governments to do the planning for the areas. So I think gradually the more and more state governments and more state departments in more and more domains are coming forward to help make that. But I think the other issue is also whether the Gram Panchayat leadership and the local government leadership are do have the competency to do the planning, and not only do the planning and not only take their position as the kind of overlordship, but as a responsibility which makes the transformation happen in the rural area. So we'll have to probably not assume that the partnerships will be built by the Panchayati Raj institutions. We'll have to do what we call design thinking to make sure that those partnerships will indeed happen, and we orient them in order to benefit from the partnership and help the area benefit from the partnership. So to take one example, see, one of the issues which I think we face is the issue of entrepreneurship in the rural areas, and large number of people are migrating. And if you want entrepreneurship to happen, if you want more enterprises to come to the rural areas, the Gram Panchayat and the local government will have to reach out to the, also reach out. It can't be that entrepreneur comes and then he does all the legwork and the local government is completely passive and active. So they will have, the local governments will also have to proactive in terms of reaching out to the different groups, as Hari mentioned, philanthropy, as Anurag mentioned about the private sector and the civil societies. So the ability to build partnership with different stakeholders with a diverse set of institutions around a core set of vision that the rural government, local governments themselves articulate will be an important activity to be achieved, or important area of activity which will need to collectively. So I think this is one area which I think is quite critical for these transformations to happen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sinha. And I understand you will need to leave, no? Yes. Thank you so much for your participation. You have an amazing job with all these tools and resources, and also building on many years that have done results. I think what we heard is now the challenge is how do you scale that to the millions, eventually billion, and tell the Indian unique story. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, panelists. Thank you.
Very good. So I'm going to go to you, Harry, on the question about what does that leadership pathway look like at the local level?
So again, I mean, I hesitate to offer a pathway because that's a very risky proposition in the context of India. So I'll talk instead about, I think a set of principles. I think directionally, this is where we have to go. I don't think there is an alternative for effective governance and community ownership in a country as diverse and dispersed as ours. There is no way for leadership concentrated at a central level to be able to effectively drive change at the pace that is required and in the ways that is required. So it has to go down to the grassroots. I think the challenge is, as one of the comments I've seen in the chat, the concerns, and Mr. Sinha also mentioned it, concerns both about devolution of responsibilities can also be a devolution of power. It takes away from some of the authority that currently vests with leadership at higher levels, and it transforms that power equation. So power structures, existing power structures, rarely give up power willingly. But that's where I think both thanks to the existing provisions of the Constitution and directionally some of the changes one is seeing with the Finance Commission and the recommendations that are coming out. Like as an example, this year, thanks to the 15th Finance Commission, we are seeing a very significant transfer of funds to to ULBs and PRIs for primary healthcare. Now, again, one cannot assume that that's going to go well. So that process needs to be supported. But my sense is this is the direction in which things will go. And the concerns everyone will have about, is the capacity there? Will the money be used, appropriately? Those are valid, but one needs to have, I think that 20-year view of, change to happen. This is not very unlike the rather paternalistic concerns that the colonial powers used to have, right? Can we give independence to these fragile societies? They will not know how to plan for their future. I mean, things haven't turned out that badly. Yeah? You look at 70 years on, and again, COVID has also revealed globally that, some of these so-called powers have feet of clay. So, I think there is always that fear of change, which kind of promotes the status quo because you're dealing with a set of known knowns. And I think any change, especially, significant change, requires us to embrace uncertainty. I think directionally this devolution is just happening. I don't think there is a way to stop it. I think the question we need to ask is how can we enable it? And to me, that is where, government has to play an overt role in laying out, the policy direction. The government, and I'm glad that, MORD is doing that actively, is also creating the space for civil society organizations and philanthropists and donors to get involved in a constructive way. So that's happening, but I think we need to do a lot more to engender the sense of community ownership and community accountability. I mean, community-led accountability, because ultimately, a lot of the changes we are talking about, the impacts of those, the negative impacts of those, are faced entirely by the communities, right? Anurag spoke about, the impact of our current healthcare system. That people should be driven into poverty because of the way healthcare is currently delivered is appalling, and something that we should not stand for as a country 75 years into independence. And my hope is that the 15th Finance Commission recommendations, the implementation of those will drive us in that change. And leadership exists at the grassroots. They just need to be given an opportunity. I mean, we see that in the many SHGs, the CLFs that have grown in the country over the last 10 years. I think where we are today vis-a-vis where we were 10 years ago is day and night. And I think that needs to be the lens that we say, where do we want to be in 2030, and stay the course for that. So I think there is an opportunity by making the right sets of investments. There is an opportunity by looking at that appropriate time horizon for change. And I think there is an opportunity to use technology appropriately. A lot of the youth in the rural areas are much more comfortable with technology, but it's not necessarily true for the slightly older folks. So we need to have an active enablement program to get people onto to tech enable them and to be able to participate in the benefits of the digital ecosystem. I don't think we are doing enough for that. A lot is being left to chance. And I think we need to get devices into the hands of women. That is going to be a dramatic accelerator as well. So let me pause here.
Great, good. So before I go to Anurag, who actually had raised a lot of the most important issues that we are discussing now, the issue of scale and the issue of civil society and its role, I wanted to talk about Javed in the chat. Said, we have to stop saying that the community are beneficiaries and start thinking of them as stakeholders. I think that's a very crucial point when we think about how to change the system. And as Harry was saying, in order to change the system, we really need to change the power. And power is one of the most difficult things to give up. When you were mentioning it, where the questions, is the capacity going to be there? Will the funds be well used? It reminds me so much about the conversations in the World Bank board about loans that we were giving to India. So, and look at the results. If you don't do that power shift, if you don't give that trust to the ultimate user, you're never going to get transformation. Any significant change requires to start by our own selves in terms of transforming. And in this case, is by this top-down approach that needs to go and really give the benefit of the doubt to the stakeholders by providing the framework, the incentives, and for all this to come together, which is what TRI has been trying to do since its inception. So Anurag, over to you. As you listen to the weaving of the points that you raised, what are your thoughts about this transformation pathway in terms of the leadership at the local level?
Let me deliberately interpret that question in a certain way, because much has been already said about it, right? So I'll deliberately interpret it in the context of us as in all of us here, people like us, right? I think that the first thing is people like us. How cut off are we from what is local? And I mean, we know this, that many of us come from what we are calling local leadership, but once we are here, we are cut off. Right? So I have a very simple operating test for this, for all of us, which is that if we are not spending 120 days of the year in the field, what I call the field, we have a problem, right? And why do we have a problem? I'll get to that, but we have a problem. So we have to be, people like us have to be 120 days out there in the field. And field doesn't mean going from Bangalore to Ranchi or to Bhopal. It actually means going to Simdega and beyond Simdega to, all these places that are there. I won't remember the names. But that's what 120 days, we have to be out there 120 days in the field. If we are not, we will never do justice to this question in any way. And we will never do justice to this question in any way. And that's the second point I have, is because let us recognize all this past stuff that we're talking about, the past stuff that is there in us, here, in the structures of our organizations, right? So let's recognize that first, right? So, I mean, decisions will get made here in Bangalore or, Gulbarga. What about Sedam? Sedam is a block headquarters somewhere in Gulbarga, right? So we got to be out there in the field. To my mind, it's 120 days a year. Second, let's recognize the past structures that we are living with, right? We are dealing with. And unless we are dealing with, we actually then try to change that stuff. This matter of local leadership is not there amongst us itself, right? The third related point to that is, and this is, there's no evading this one as well, which is that unless we change that power structure, unless we demonstrate our commitment to what we're talking about here, the individual psychology is that local leadership, as it develops, will want to become non-local, right? So this example of Simdega that I gave, which is it's a beautiful place, a district in Jharkhand. I mean, they don't want to stay in Simdega. They want to get out, get to Ranchi. And after Ranchi, the next stop is actually Delhi, right? Or whatever. So, every thread, every aspect of what was talked about is directly relevant. I mean, the local governance stuff and what investment we are making and what language to use, beneficiary versus stakeholder versus rights holders. All that is directly relevant. But I'm asking this question of myself and all of us, that what is it that we do? What is it that we are doing to make this happen? And the second point, which really impacts the first point, which is spending 120 days in the field, will help us recognize and change this power structure. It will also help this flow of the local to becoming non-local sort of reduce. But eventually, it's a question of how we are changing decision-making in our organizations, right? Culturally. So that's what I think about this. And of course, there are many other aspects, but we'll let it go for the time being.
Whoa. Very important comment. So if I put it in terms of scale, the point that you had made before, and systems change, the question is, are we scaling up or maybe struggling to scale up something because the system around it is not there for this to scale? And second, the system is designed to produce exactly the results that it's producing. The person in a very small village wanting to eventually go to Delhi is the result of a system, the relations in a system. So the question that I think you are asking us, Anurag, which is a really difficult, challenging question, is what is the role that we are playing in perpetuating this system? And what is the disruption that needs to happen for this to change? So I take this question back to you first, Anurag, since you are clearly have thought a lot about this, and then I'll go to Harry. What is it that we need to change? What is it that we need to disrupt within our own space for this to change?
Gosh, that's a very hard one. I am not a great believer in theories of change and systems and stuff like that, right? I think we're all too small for all this. So I feel that we need to ask those questions of ourselves. And very many of us are in very important, if I may say so, powerful, quote unquote, roles. I think this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. So I don't want to believe that I have any kind of solutions. I mean, let alone solutions, even ideas about how the system will change on this matter. But there are very many here and lots of our friends and colleagues out there. If you were to ask us these questions and try and change ourselves, I think it'll have some effect. Right? So, and also, that's where I started with my confession that I'm a bit of a bear. I think we need to face reality as it is, right? We don't want to face reality as we wished it to be. You have to face reality as it is. So, Isabel, I don't know whether I have a wonderfully, deeply thoughtful answer, because I really don't think there is something like that possible. Let's look at ourselves. Let's try and change ourselves first. And if we change ourselves, our organizations will change. And, between TRIF and the Bill and Melinda and Gates Foundation and the Azim Premji Foundation, I don't know who else is there. We'll have some influence in this country.
So you think that the question in itself is the most important thing to do right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Harry, what about you? What do you think?
No, I think I'm going to take the same pathway as Anurag and, gracefully deflect, because it is a tough one to answer. But I think a few things that, come to mind. To me, it starts with accepting or understanding what we do not know and what we do not have answers for. Oftentimes, because of the positions or places we find ourselves,